The Arizona heat hadn't let up for days, but it was the envelope in Caleb's mailbox that made his hands sweat. He stepped down from the porch, boots stirring the powdered red dirt as he crossed the gravel path. The cicadas were already buzzing, their hum slicing through the morning quiet like a warning siren no one else heard. He squinted at the sun coming over the distant ridge, then pulled the single envelope from the rusted mailbox. A green strip along the top read, "Certified Mail" in bold block letters. Caleb didn't need to open it to know something was wrong. Back inside, he dropped the envelope on the kitchen table, poured a cup of black coffee that had been sitting since before dawn, and turned the AM radio knob with a practiced hand. Static snapped and hissed until the familiar low voice of the local weather report came through. Highs in the upper 90s again today. Dry winds from the southeast. He sat for a long minute before peeling the envelope open with his pocket knife. Inside was a single sheet of HOA letterhead, typed in clinical. After review of boundary reclassification per Section 4C of the Redstone Valley Improvement Plan, your parcel's southwest acre has been designated for community utility optimization, effective immediately. He reread the words slowly, letting them settle like grit in his gut. The land in question, his back acre, was where his well line began, where his grandfather had first dug in 1941. The idea that anyone could claim it now under the name of optimization felt like an insult whispered behind his back. Caleb stepped onto the porch again and looked toward the south fence line. Beyond it, Keith Wells' new stucco home was already hosting a parade of contractors. He saw two men unloading PVC pipes, one holding what looked like a blueprint. They moved like they knew where they were going. He drained the coffee, grabbed his gloves and hat, and headed out past the chicken coop, past the old mesquite tree where his dog used to sleep, to where the barbed wire marked the end of what he considered his domain. The soil was cracked and dry underfoot. As he bent to tighten a loose post, he spotted something unusual along the far edge. Fresh tool marks, faint lines in the dust, and two sets of boot prints leading to a shallow trench. A pale section of pipe peeked out from under a pile of recently disturbed dirt. He ran his fingers along the ground, tracing the new cut. The pipe was narrow, high-pressure grade, and it ran not along his fence, but under it, directly toward the side of Keith's property. He stood slowly, heart thumping in a quiet, measured rhythm. The wind carried the smell of creosote and sun-warmed plastic. A rattling sound from his porch reminded him the well pump had started again. By the time he reached the house, the pressure from the tap was half of what it had been yesterday. Caleb opened the cabinet under the sink, checked the filter, the gauges. Nothing clogged, just less. He opened the back panel on the well controller outside and watched the pressure reading drop, bit by bit. He closed the box, eyes narrowing. Someone was pulling from the line. Not a leak, a redirection. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the light turned amber across the field, that he walked back down toward the trench with a flashlight and a hand trowel. He knelt in the dry grass and dug gently where the pipe curved away. His fingers met smooth plastic again, then a joint coupling, freshly tightened. He sat back on his heels, wiping dust from his jeans, and shook his head. Someone's stealing water, and they think I won't notice. The well hadn't failed in 3 generations, until strangers laid hands on it. Caleb stood barefoot on the cool tile of his kitchen, still sticky from the mop he'd dragged across it before sunrise. The house was silent except for the hum of the old fridge and the soft groan of wood expanding under the heat. The thermometer above the window read 98, and it wasn't even 2 p.m. Helen showed up with a pie. She didn't knock. She never did. The screen door creaked open, then shut again with a soft clap as she stepped inside, the scent of pecan and cinnamon cutting through the stale air. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said, setting the foil-covered dish on the table, without ceremony. Caleb nodded and poured her a glass of tea without asking. They sat at the table like they had a dozen times before. Only this time there was a leather folder spread between them, stuffed with deeds, maps, and papers that hadn't seen daylight in decades. She adjusted her glasses and flipped a yellowed page toward him. There, that's your grandfather's signature, right there next to the notary. From 36, Caleb leaned in, reading the line again. Grant of exclusive and perpetual access to all natural water sources beneath parcel 42B. Is that what I think it is? He asked quietly. Helen smiled. Your grandfather registered that well himself. It's older than this HOA by a good 30 years. He tapped the page gently, as if the ink might disappear. Then why would they risk cutting into the system? Helen took a slow sip of her tea. Because they don't expect you to know this exists. Most folks don't. And even if they do, they think nobody will fight. Caleb stood, went to the closet, and returned with a battered cardboard box marked Morgan Utilities. Inside was a weathered GPS unit and a laminated topographical map. He unfolded it beside the folder. The trench starts here, he said, pointing to a scratch near the southwest fence. If they're tapping the well line, they'll have to route east to connect into the new properties. Helen nodded. You still remember how to read elevation curves? Like riding a bike, Caleb said. He powered on the GPS and stepped out the back door. For the next hour, he walked the length of his property, holding the device in one hand and a surveyor's flag in the other. Where the numbers dipped or rose unexpectedly, places that didn't match the original contours, he planted a marker. By the time he returned to the porch, sweat had soaked through his shirt, and the back of his neck was sunburnt. Helen had left a note on the fridge. Call Tomas. He owes you one. He didn't wait. Caleb dialed from the kitchen landline, the kind with a coiled cord and sticky buttons. On the second ring, a familiar voice answered. Delgado. Tomas, it's Caleb Morgan. There was a pause. Professor, I thought you retired. I did, but the HOA just started rerouting water through my land. I've got boundary maps, a registered deed from 1936, and a GPS trail that runs straight into their utility easement. Another pause. You still live out near Redstone? Same parcel, 42B. I'll check the county grid for recent filings, Tomas said. If your rights are intact, they're in serious violation. I'll call you back in an hour. The line went dead. Caleb sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the flag positions he'd sketched onto a napkin. Each red X was a point of intersection. He could almost see the pipe cutting beneath his soil. Evening came slow and thick. He peeled back the foil on Helen's pie, cut himself a slice, and ate it cold. Outside, the air was still blistering, but a distant wind stirred the leaves behind the shed. That was when he heard it. A faint rush, too steady to be wind, too soft to be mechanical. He walked to the back door, stepped into his boots, and followed the sound, flashlight in hand. The closer he got to the shed, the louder it grew, a rhythmic, almost artificial flow that came from beneath the earth, from where no natural creek or pipe should be. He held his breath and leaned toward the ground. It was unmistakable now. That night, Caleb heard the faint rumble of water running, and it's not from his tap. Pipes can lie buried for years, but a stolen drop always leaves tracks. Wednesday arrived with wind, dry and sharp, blowing fine red dust in swirling columns across Caleb's porch. He sat on the edge of the steps, boots planted firmly on the cracked wood, watching the HOA crew amble around the far end of the lot. They moved with slow confidence, like men certain of their permissions. Behind them, a row of stakes marked the boundaries of what Eleanor had started calling the community garden. Caleb had yet to see a single seed or shovel that wasn't meant for trenching. He stood, brushed the dust off his knees, and crossed the field. Keith Wells was at the edge of the site, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding any intention. Caleb didn't bother with preamble. "You're on my line." Keith looked up, blinking behind his lenses. "Sorry?" Caleb pointed toward the dirt where the soil had been disturbed again, fresh, wet clay rising in clumps around the trench. "That pipe you're laying cuts straight across my property. You're stealing from my well." Keith shifted. "This is part of the approved infrastructure plan." Caleb stepped closer. "Then show me the permit." Keith opened his mouth, but another voice answered for him. "Mr. Morgan." Eleanor Whitmore appeared with the ease of someone already winning a chess match. Her blazer was pressed, heels clean despite the dust, clipboard tucked tight against her chest. "We've reviewed everything. It's all in compliance with Section 12 of the Utility Realignment Act." Caleb reached into the folder tucked under his arm and handed her a single page, its edges brittle, but the ink still clear. "This is a deed dated 1936. It grants my family sole rights to all subsurface water sources under Parcel 42B. She read it, blinked once, and returned it without comment. "I've also filed a complaint with the Arizona Water Resources Department," he continued. "Agent Tomas Delgado is reviewing the coordinates now. You'll be hearing from him." Eleanor's expression didn't flicker. "I'm sure the state will find everything as orderly as we have." "I doubt that," Caleb said. He turned to face the growing group of HOA observers lingering at a polite distance, some with arms crossed, others pretending to check their phones. He walked to the edge of the trench, pulled a wooden stake from the ground, and replaced it with a white sign stenciled in thick black letters. "Private System. Trespassers will face civil suit." Without another word, he uncapped a can of spray paint from his tool belt, shook it twice, and began marking a jagged red line across the trench path. Each stroke ran perpendicular to the pipeline's direction, slicing across the dirt like a warning flare. The color was bright against the earth. Undeniable. When he finished, he turned back toward Eleanor. "You crossed the wrong line." For a moment, silence held the field. Then she smiled. "Well, Mr. Morgan, if you believe you have a case, by all means, pursue it. But let's keep things civil, shall we?" Keith avoided eye contact. One of the other crewmen muttered something and kicked at the ground. Across the street, Helen stood beneath her porch awning, holding a glass of tea. She didn't wave, but Caleb saw her nod, just once. He walked back toward the house as the wind picked up again. That evening, he didn't turn on the porch light. He sat by the window instead, watching the flags flap in the dying light. By midnight, the wind had stilled. Caleb stepped out one last time to check the trench. He moved slowly, flashlight in hand, scanning the line he'd painted that morning. The red markings were gone. Someone had shoveled fresh dirt across them. Where his sign had stood, there was only a single blue HOA flag, fluttering in the moonlight. The town hall had never felt so crowded or so divided. Caleb arrived just before 6, the evening sun casting long shadows across the steps of the old red brick building. A line of folding chairs stretched out the front door, the kind you only saw at funerals and 4th of July cookouts. Inside, the air was stifling. 2 oscillating fans buzzed on either side of the podium, and a misting unit wheezed from the corner like a dying animal. Sweat beaded on necks and brows. The desert heat hadn't softened just because it was evening. He made his way to a spot along the wall, briefcase in hand, catching the faint smell of shoe polish and old carpet. The low murmur of conversations dropped as Eleanor Whitmore stepped to the front. She looked composed as always, hair pinned neatly, white blazer sharp against the faded backdrop of the town seal. She tapped the mic once, then began. "Thank you all for coming. As we continue to modernize Redstone Valley, it's important we think about our future, not just for us, but for our children and grandchildren." Caleb listened with folded arms as she spoke of resilience, green space, and long-term vision. Her words glided like smooth stones over still water, carefully avoiding any mention of pipeline trenches or boundary violations. She had rehearsed well. When she paused to take a sip from a cold bottle, Caleb stepped forward. "Madam Chair," he said calmly, "I request 10 minutes to speak." A ripple went through the room. Someone near the back coughed. Eleanor's smile barely faltered. "This meeting is on a tight schedule." "He has a right," Helen called from the second row, holding up a folded copy of the HOA charter. Eleanor hesitated. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she nodded. "Very well. 10 minutes." Caleb walked to the front, unlatched his briefcase, and laid a single page on the lectern. The paper was worn and yellow, but the notary seal was intact. "This document is a recorded deed from 1936, signed and filed with the state, granting my family sole and perpetual rights to all groundwater beneath Parcel 42B. He paused, let it settle. Helen began passing out copies, moving with quiet precision down each aisle. "Over the past week, members of this HOA have trespassed on my land, tapped into my water supply, and rerouted it to neighboring properties without consent. Did not expect was that I kept everything." Whispers started. Some heads turned. Others looked down. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. "And I'm not the only one who has something to say." He tapped the screen. A projector near the back buzzed to life, displaying a Zoom call. Tomas appeared in a short-sleeved dress shirt, headset snug over his ears, backlit by a wall of state logos. "Good evening, folks," he said smoothly. "My name is Tomas Delgado, Arizona Department of Water Resources. I've reviewed the documents Mr. Morgan provided and cross-referenced them with the state's underground resource allocations. Based on current boundaries, any extraction or rerouting of water from the well beneath Parcel 42B without written consent is a legal violation." Gasps followed. A man near the front muttered something about his sprinkler system. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice syrupy but tight. "This is misleading. The HOA has authorization under the Utility Enhancement Initiative." "You mean the one never filed with the state?" Tomas countered through the speaker. "I pulled those records. There's no official permit for shared water access from that well. None." The air thickened. A murmur rose, not of curiosity, but of concern. Caleb took a breath, steady. "Several of you," he said, eyes scanning the rows, "have pools or irrigation lines installed within the last 6 months. You may not have known where your water came from, but now you do." A homeowner in the third row paled visibly. Another leaned toward her husband, whispering. He pointed toward a copy of the trench map, now projected on the wall. "Here and here. These lines don't come from city water. They run from under my field, through illegal tap points, directly to 6 properties." The room broke. Shouts rose, questions, accusations. One man demanded to know how much he'd paid for fake connections. Another asked if their property values would drop. "Order!" Eleanor shouted, banging her hand on the lectern. Her voice cracked under the weight of it. "Let's not rush to judgment. These matters are being reviewed internally." From the back, Keith Wells stood slowly, face drained. Dana clutched his arm. He opened his mouth, then sat back down, as if whatever he had to say had evaporated. Eleanor faced Caleb again, jaw tight, but still smiling. "You may have your law, Mr. Morgan, but I have a plan B." By Friday morning, the dust storm had passed, but something darker had rolled in. The wind had finally calmed, but the sky was still the color of old tin, and the grit in the air clung to Caleb's teeth as he stepped outside. The ground around the wellhead looked different. It wasn't just dust that had shifted overnight, it was the earth itself. Orange survey flags dotted the south fence line, some still fluttering from fresh placement. Faint tire tracks curved behind the shed where the soil had been disturbed and tamped down again. He crouched by the first flag, fingertips brushing the edge of a shallow trench not there yesterday. Whoever had come, they hadn't bothered to hide it. They thought they didn't have to. Caleb didn't call anyone. He just walked the perimeter and waited. It wasn't long before a white county-marked truck rolled in, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. Two men in reflective vests stepped out of the truck, unfolding clipboards like shields. Eleanor Whitmore emerged from the SUV, wearing dark sunglasses and a faint smile. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said crisply. "We're here to verify pending easement revisions under Redstone Resolution 47C. Caleb didn't respond. One of the men walked toward the shed. "We have orders to inspect the grading around your utility access. There's a copy of the zoning update here, along with the original access permission." Eleanor handed Caleb a laminated sheet. It bore a signature above the date, May 1999. His name neatly printed in a style that looked just familiar enough to pass. He held the page like it might burn. "I never signed this." "It's a matter of public record," Eleanor said. "Filed with the county." Helen's voice cut in from behind him. "That's not his signature." She stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. "Caleb prints his initials. Always has. I worked for the state long enough to know a forgery when I see one." The air shifted. Caleb turned to the nearest contractor. "You're standing on my wellhead. You might want to move." Eleanor's smile thinned. "Mr. Morgan, we're within our rights." "No," a voice interrupted from the road. Tomas stood beside his state-issued truck, holding a clipboard and an envelope with the Arizona state seal. "You're not." He walked slowly, his boots kicking up dust. "As of 7:14 this morning, the Department of Water Resources has issued an injunction halting all development, surveying, and construction within a 100-foot radius of Parcel 42B's well infrastructure. Pending legal review of water rights and potential zoning irregularities," he handed Caleb a stamped notice. "This is your copy." The surveyors froze. One of them muttered something and took a step back. Eleanor raised a hand. "This is all a misunderstanding. We have documentation." Tomas held up the laminated permit Caleb had been given minutes earlier. "This document? The one filed under a different case number and submitted by a company that doesn't exist in the state registry?" He passed it to the sheriff, who had been silently watching from the side of the lot. The sheriff turned it over in his hands, lips pressing into a line. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask your crew to step off this property until this gets sorted." "This is absurd," Eleanor snapped. "Could be," the sheriff replied, "or it could be document fraud. And if it is, that's not a civil issue anymore." Her mouth twitched. "We'll see about that." "We will," Caleb said quietly. The contractors began packing up. One of them gave Caleb a half-apologetic nod before backing the truck out the drive. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up again, but the air felt lighter. Helen stayed for dinner, fried potatoes, leftover roast, and a slice of her pie. Tomas left with copies of everything. The sheriff promised a follow-up report and drove off without turning on his lights. That night, just after 10, Caleb stepped out to check the porch. A small padded envelope sat in the mailbox. No return address, no postage. Inside was a flash drive. The label was printed in plain black letters. Sunrise Holdings, you were right. In Redstone, water built everything, and nearly destroyed it too. The sun dipped low over the ridge, casting gold across the freshly swept sidewalk near the front gate. Folding tables lined the gravel turnaround, covered in red checkered cloths and trays of grilled corn, potato salad, and someone's famous mesquite ribs. Paper plates sagged under the weight of second helpings, and the smell of hickory smoke curled through the air. It had been 2 weeks since the ruling. The state court decision came down swift and clear. The HOA had violated multiple zoning laws and water statutes. Caleb's water rights were reaffirmed in full, the trench work deemed illegal, and all unauthorized utility lines were ordered severed within 5 business days. The resort plan collapsed before a single permit was finalized. Caleb stood near the gate, shaking hands with neighbors he never expected to speak to again. Helen hovered beside the lemonade cooler, trading quiet jabs with the sheriff over whose chili had won the cook-off in '08. Keith and Dana approached slowly, eyes low but hands extended. "I don't expect forgiveness," Keith said, voice low but steady. "But I want to help." Dana held out a check. "We want to cover the repairs. You shouldn't have to pay for what they broke." Caleb nodded. "Appreciate that. Just don't plant anything near my well again." They laughed lightly, and the tension eased. Eleanor sat alone on a folding chair near the back edge of the lot, beneath a banner that read, HOA Elections, Vote for Renewal. Her blouse was uncharacteristically plain, her hair pulled back without its usual precision. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Everyone already knew the truth. The flash drive had done its job. Once decrypted, it revealed purchase agreements, internal emails, and a timeline. Sunrise Valley Holdings, registered under Eleanor's ex-husband's name, had planned to buy the land surrounding the community resort once construction cleared Caleb's fence. A classic flip and develop scheme. But the timing was sloppy, the greed too obvious. Tomas had made sure the documents reached the county board. The article in the Redstone Weekly came next. The Man Who Owned the Water. It ran on the front page with a photo of Caleb standing beside his well, arms crossed and dirt still on his boots. The writer had called him an unlikely steward of Redstone's most precious resource. Now, beneath the orange sky, Tomas handed Caleb a letter, formal but friendly, offering him a seat on the new community water board. "You'll keep us honest," he'd said. Caleb folded it and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Only if the meetings aren't at 7 in the morning." As dusk settled, someone called out, "Caleb, show us it still works." He chuckled, walked across the lawn to the old spigot at the base of the wellhead. The crowd quieted as he turned the knob. A solid stream of water burst from the pipe, clear and cold, splashing into the waiting tin bucket below. Applause erupted, scattered at first, then building. He smiled but said nothing. There wasn't much left to say. The next morning, with the June heat already creeping in, Caleb checked his mailbox. Among bills and a sympathy card from an old college friend was a legal envelope, crisp, white, and printed with unfamiliar return information. He slid it open with his pocket knife. Inside was a single letter. "Dear Mr. Morgan, our firm represents Desert Core Energy, a company currently exploring potential mineral rights throughout Redstone Valley. We would welcome the opportunity for a friendly conversation regarding any subsurface access arrangements under your property." He read it twice, then looked out toward the ridge, where the water ran just beneath the surface, and where the land, it seemed, was never quite safe from someone's plans. The water still runs beneath Caleb's land, quiet, steady, and just as it always has. What changed wasn't the flow underground, but the strength above it. One man's patience, a neighbor's memory, and a town learning to stand on the right side of the fence. In a world where papers can lie and power can shift, the truth still holds weight, especially when written in dirt and witnessed by generations. As the sun sets over Redstone, it reminds us that legacy isn't just what's left behind, but what we choose to protect while we're here. And sometimes justice flows just like water, slow at first, but impossible to stop once it finds its way.